Hello everyone, I hope that you're all doing well. Today we are driving into our comprehensive revision for English for the second semester, covering all the lessons from 1 to 8. Our goal through this revision is not just to memorize vocabulary, that is to say words, but to master how we communicate complex technical changes, network structures, and future trends using precise English grammar. By the end of this session, you will be able to bridge the gap between technical expertise and professional communication. So let's start with the history of our field. If you remember, we had in our first lesson the theme of the evolution of ICT. So when discussing ICT evolution, the biggest challenge is choosing the right tense. Look at the grammar focus. We use the past simple for dead history, things that happened at specific point, like for example in the 1990s. So I repeat, when we use the past simple, we use it to speak about actions happened in the past, but we know when it exactly happened. That is to say, we know the specific time when the action happened. However, if the action started in the past but is the reason our world looks like the way it does today, that is to say, if the action started in the past but still has effects in the present, we use the present perfect. For example, notice the difference here. We developed a system in the 2020s. That was a historical fact, a dead action that has no result in the present. However, for example, technology has changed our communication. That is a current reality. However, the action started in the past. So when the action starts in the past and still is continuing or having effect in the present, what do we use? We use the present perfect to express the idea. So when you write your summaries, keep your personal opinion out. Stick to the professional facts of ICT evolution or innovation. Okay? So, regarding lesson 2, we have seen network as a theme. So, moving to networks, to describe a system like a client-server network, you need the relative clauses. They allow you to add details without starting a new sentence. Notice the defining clause. It tells us exactly what a server is. If we remove it, the sentence loses its meaning. However, the non-defining clause is just an extra bonus information. Always remember to wrap that extra information, use commas. You can use, for example, as a relative clause which or that for the hardware, and whose when you are describing who owns the data or the possession of nodes. Okay, so be careful how to use relative, defining, and non-defining clauses. The defining clause is used to add information. Without it, a sentence is incomplete. However, the undefining clause adds just an extra information. If you remove it, the sentence is complete. So in lesson 3, we have seen another theme, which is internet and systems. Here we look at laws of system using modal verbs. We have seen different modal verbs like can, must, may, and should. They are used for different purposes. This is about degrees of certainty or necessity. If a security protocol is mandatory, you must use must. That is to say, when it is an obligation, it is necessary, you use must. If you are giving a colleague a tip or an advice, how to speed up their connection, you can use should for advice. In your process description, the magic is in linking words. So when you use a process description, you have to use modal verbs as well the linking words that show sequence. They show the order of the action. If you remember, we have seen how to describe a process in the first semester. We have said that we can use the imperative, but as well to show the necessity of the action, it's preferably to use modal verbs as well, and to use the sequence words like first, then, after that, and finally, in order to guide perfectly the user. So these words are your technical explication, and they are not just to be used randomly as a list. They provide the glue for the sequence. That is to say, they show the logic order of the steps of that process you are describing. So now speaking about lesson 4, where we have seen systems and processes. This is so crucial shift for your writing. In ICT, we often don't care who clicked the button, we care that the data was processed. So what do we understand here? We understand that the results are important rather than who did the action. So here we are speaking about passive voice. This is why we use passive voice. Instead of saying the technician stores data, we say data is stored because we care about data, not about the technician. It sounds more professional and objective. Remember the formula. To form passive voice, you can use the subject plus the verb to be in the appropriate tense plus the past participle of the verb, which is the verb plus ed, or for the irregular verbs, you can find it in the third column of the irregular verbs. So use this whenever you want to sound like a technical expert rather than a storyteller, okay? So now moving to lesson 5, where we have seen and we have spoken about cloud computing, which is all about recent updates and ongoing experiences. We expand on the present perfect here. If you just finished an upload, you've just uploaded it. If your company started using Azure or AWS 5 years ago and still using it, you have used it for 5 years. Notice the word for marks the duration. When you explain the cloud to a client, always start with a clear definition before you jump into pros and cons. So try to remember the use of linking words or time adverbs, like for example for, since, already, which are detailed in the lesson. Try to take a look back on them. So speaking about lesson 6, let's talk about the common mistakes. The word data in English. In ICT context, data is usually treated as an uncountable noun. So in this lesson, we have seen countable and uncountable nouns. We have said that with uncountable nouns, they are always wearing a verb in a singular form. So even though it feels like many things, we treat it as a single mass. So we say much data is stored and not are stored. However, files and servers are countable nouns and they will the plural form, so you can have one server or 10 servers. That is to say, you can use the verb with the appropriate form, either in singular or plural. So what's your subject-verb agreement, which is very important, and you will be able to use grammar properly. Moving to lesson 8, we have spoken about comparison in ICT. In your career, you will often have to justify why one system is better than the other. This requires comparatives. Remember the short versus long rule. Fast become faster, but efficient is a long word, needs more efficient. So here we understand that for a short word of one syllable, we add an ER for comparative and an EST for superlatives. However, for long words containing more than one syllable, we use the adverb more before the adjective and the most before the superlative. Okay, so don't forget the irregulars. Don't say more good, but say better. If you're picking the absolute top tier system, that's your superlative, the most secure or the best. So try to memorize the irregular adjectives and how to use them. Finally, in our last lesson, we look forward when we predict that AI will do. We use will because the future is a bit uncertain. AI will automate more jobs. Here we are speaking about the future forms, but if you have a meeting scheduled or project plan already written, use going to. It shows intent and planning when writing about the future of AI. Don't just say it will be cool. Give me an argument. Give a reason and specific examples of analysis or prediction. Here I have chosen to speak about the future because we have already done it in the first semester, not in the second semester, but it may be included in your writing exam. Okay, so let me tell you about how the strategy to wrap up our revision, or to summarize, your revision should be split into halves. That is to say, on one side, try to master grammar structures and rules that we have seen in all the lessons, tenses, how they are used correctly, and try to remember the correct structure of each tense. Try to remember the passive voice and relative, and on the other hand, try to practice writing outputs or paragraphs. That is to say, not only you don't have only to memorize rules and vocabulary, that is to say words, but you need to apply them properly. So I repeat, don't look just at the vocabulary list and try to memorize it like a dictionary, but try to use them in sentences or in paragraphs. This is how you truly learn and be ready for the exam. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask either in the comments or via email. And I wish you best of luck. I wish you best of luck in your exams. That was all regarding the revision.